So welcome to our session tonight with VT Reach, which stands for Virtual Teleconference. Reach, Explore, and Aspire to Careers in Healthcare. We have a great panel tonight speaking about palliative and hospice medicine.
Yes, so thank you so much to Dr. Stephen Berns for being here, Lindsay Gagnon, and Chelsea Chalfant, and we will let Dr. Berns take it away with his inspiration into medicine.
So appreciate everyone being here tonight. I'm Steve. My journey into medicine really came from having an interest in humanism from a young age. I think I always dreamed of being a archaeologist, and I think when I came to undergrad, I fell in love with anthropology and literature, and so I was a Spanish lit minor as well. And I think just the interaction with humans and understanding culture, and I had a secret passion for math, and I always wondered if I should have been a math major. And so sort of the combo of a little bit of science and a lot of humanities got me into med school, or got me thinking about med school. And the other piece that I would say is how I got into palliative care. I actually always dreamed of being a critical care specialist. I really loved physiology when I was in med school and as a resident. And for me, I also noticed that healthcare just was broken, and I was getting jaded at the time as a resident. And I remember just this very upset, angry patient. She wouldn't talk to my team. And we were fortunate to have a palliative care doctor as our sort of a guest lecturer, guest teacher. And he's like, oh, I'll speak to her. And so we all went into the room together. And like, seriously, in 2 seconds, she opened up to him. And he said these magical words, tell me more about that. And it like opened this amazing world and getting to know her. And we found out sort of why she was really upset. And so I remember going outside the room and being like, whoa, I want those skills. That's a way to really get to know your patients. And so that was sort of how I got introduced to palliative care. And so went to Brandeis University, anthro major and Spanish lit minor. And then I graduated from Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. And actually in between my 3rd and 4th year, it was important for me to sort of see if I wanted to do some research in academics. So I did a Doris Duke Clinical Research Fellowship, and actually really got a lot of great experience with working with adults with asthma in low-income neighborhoods, and it was a great project to be part of. And I actually stayed at Mount Sinai for my residency and did internal medicine, and then stayed on as a hospice and palliative medicine fellowship. It was really to buy time to make a decision whether or not I wanted to do critical care and oncology. Ended up doing a senior chief resident year at Mount Sinai, and then decided that palliative care was the career for me. Didn't do another fellowship, stayed on as faculty there for a while, and then actually came here. We were looking for someone to help grow the academic mission of our palliative care division at UVM Medical Center, Lerner College of Medicine, most in particularly to start a hospice and palliative medicine fellowship. And I was fortunate to just bump into Bob Gramling, who was at the time the division head, and found a passion here and have stayed. And now I help to lead our fellowship and also am the current site leader for UVM Medical Center. So it's been a really fun journey so far. Oh, look. And of course, my Zoom has to update now. So currently, I'm only 25% clinical. I do mostly inpatient palliative care consults. I do 30% teaching in the med school for residency programs, as well as for practicing clinicians. I do about 30% administrative for both the site and the fellowship program. And then I also do a lot of teaching through our Talk Vermont program, which is helping to train our practicing clinicians and teaching them serious illness communication, both across UVM Medical Center, but our health network across Vermont and New York. I love it. So. And then my work, if I'm on clinical, I see about 7 to 10 patients a day, really spending time with them, getting to know them, getting to know what's important to them, helping them with their symptoms, collaborating a lot with teams and rounding with them, and then always including students, residents, and fellows in that work. When I'm not on clinical, most of my days are spent in Zoom meetings currently, as well as doing some teaching, which keeps me fulfilled during those non-clinical days. But outside, I love to go to the outdoors, and that's why I love moving to Vermont, running, hiking. I have now a 1-year-old son, and love playing with him now that he's like giggling and starting to walk. I also love cooking. There's something very sciencey about cooking, and I love it. And then baking's even more sciencey, and I even love it more. But I also love music, and I remember in residency, I won our mixtape competitions several years in a row, and now translated that to making mixes on Spotify.
Thank you so much, Dr. Berns, and we'll let Lindsay take it away. I did just want to remind everyone that after the 3 of these panelists speak, we'll have a Q&A session. And so you can put those questions in the chat as we go, and we'll address them during that time. And Lindsay, take it away.
I think you might be muted, Lindsay. Try now. I'm not sure if it's just me, but
I can't hear you either right now.
Uh-oh.
We can move on to Chelsea and come back to you if you want to try to look at your audio. Is that okay? Thumbs up? Okay.
Quick troubleshooting.
And I'm going to spotlight Chelsea for everyone.
Hi guys. I'm Chelsea Chalfant. I'm a nurse. I'm an RN BSN. I don't know if I'm like Steve, 20 years ago, if you asked me if I would have been in healthcare, I would have said, heck no. It was never in my trajectory as like a young adult, or as a young person. I actually have an initial background in natural resources and environmental management. And I always loved teaching. So education was definitely a pathway for me. It was just like, what setting am I going to do it in? But I did a lot of background. My initial background in my first career was in therapeutic recreation. I worked with children and adults with profound illnesses, developmental disabilities. So I just had this love and passion of trying to create these safe, wonderful growing spaces and outdoor environments. I became more interested in public health. And when I started to get interested in healthcare, I thought, I'm going to do public health. And now I'm in hospice and palliative care. And it's just funny where your life takes you. But I did find my way into healthcare, and I've been doing it for a while, and I love it. As far as my education background, I started in a small little state school in Indiana. I'm a Hoosier. So for those people who know the Midwest, I'm from Indiana. We call ourselves Hoosiers. I went to a small state school called Ball State University, and that's where my passion grew for environmental management. But eventually, the course of my career, I fell in love with public health, and I was interested in that. And I went to Kent State University. I had a biology-based degree, my first degree, and I thought, oh, nursing school, that'll be fine. I'm got biology. Oh, nursing school was a whirlwind. Kent State had this great program that was tied to Cleveland Clinic in Ohio. I ended up in Ohio eventually, and I did this accelerated track program and partnered with the Cleveland Clinic, and I worked for them for quite some time. But like I said, I started my career as program coordinator and developer in education in outdoor settings. And that's where I really loved education and teaching. And when I first started my nursing career after nursing school, I was part of this partnership with the Cleveland Clinic. It was a great program. I was so lucky to be in it, but I found my way I was enticed by the operating room, which wasn't something I was thinking of when I first got into healthcare, but a really great nursing fellowship program. It was a pretty intense fellowship program. And I started my career in the ORs in neuro and spine and pediatrics. So I was surgical. And then a friend of mine who was working in oncology kind of pulled me this way and said, hey, because I always wondered what happened to these patients that I was caring for in the OR and these profound diagnoses and with malignancies. And I kind of wondered what happened to them. And I found my way to oncology, stayed at Cleveland Clinic there and did inpatient, outpatient. I had a really good opportunity as a patient care navigator in the outpatient oncology and palliative care clinics. And then we moved back to Indiana from Ohio, just to be closer to my folks. And I found my way on a resource float pool for oncology and palliative care at a regional hospital. And then I started to fall in love with hospice. I was floating over there more. And I was like, where has this been all my life? I had just profound experience and I didn't want to go into people's homes. I was actually pretty nervous at first, but when I felt so honored when I finally made it to people's homes and saw how care could be delivered in different settings. I just fell in love with it, and the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I learned so much about the work and just people and care planning for all sorts of people at end of life. And I just loved it. And then I eventually found my way to Vermont because my husband wanted to snowboard every day. So we found our way to Vermont. And a really great opportunity opened up. They were looking for a clinical educator and mostly hospice and palliative care in UVM's health networks, home health and hospice. And I've been here since 2017, be 6 years this month. And most of my work, as far as like my daily work, every day is different. And could you go to the next slide? I'm sorry. So 50% of what I do is clinical education. And what that means is I'm working alongside clinicians. It could be nurses, it could be licensed nursing assistants, it could be providers, medical social workers, patient care attendants, an interdisciplinary group. And I'm developing, teaching and providing support to them as they care for people at end of life. So a lot of what I'm doing is clinical teaching. That's what I was doing this evening, was helping with a complex patient, get them settled in. I do some classroom teaching as well, onboarding, orientation, building competency and skill level in our staff. So I do also a lot of program development. That's probably 30% is building that content and delivery in different platforms. And platforms can vary from like in-person classroom teaching, Zoom teaching. We've gotten really good at virtual teaching. I think everyone has through COVID. And that's a new skill set. And I think Lindsay and Steve can also say like something that we've had to grow into. I'm doing podcasts now. Building online platforms, online learning, but I really love the in-person, like working alongside a clinician and helping them. And I learn a lot too. And then my not so fun part, but I still like it in some senses, the quality and auditing. I'm part of process improvement projects, auditing processes, records, documentation, quality projects, which is interesting. It's not as much fun as teaching and program development, but it helps me kind of guide my path and how I'm supporting my team. So yeah, and I love this work. As far as work-life integration, it varies every day. Most of my mornings I'm teaching, I'm doing touch-ins. A lot of our clinicians are all over the place. We have clinicians that work out in the field in people's homes and nursing facilities. We have an inpatient hospice facility. So I'm doing a variety of different teaching. I do a lot of content development, and then also I have to build in some time for auditing, education follow-up. And as far as my work-life balance, we got a house not too long ago, so it's like constantly working on the house. The adulting part, dog walking. I have a dog named May. I love to walk her. Cooking. I love cooking. Whatever season's going on, I'm trying to find something to stay busy, like being on the water, canoeing. I like the snow, playing in the snow. I listen to, podcasts, music, video chatting with my family because they're still out in the Midwest. So yeah, that's my work-life balance.
And thank you. And we're going to move back. Lindsay's audio should be working now.
Let's see, how is that?
Perfect.
Yay!
We can hear you.
Good.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah, so I started out adamantly not wanting to get into medicine or nursing. I can recall being, in high school and then when I went to get my undergrad, just wanting to avoid any advanced science class. And so I really took a deep dive into the humanities and social sciences. But through that, I took a lot of sociology courses, which I think really bring a nice perspective. And I even remember taking a course on death and dying from one of the sociology professors, and who had met Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and just was phenomenal. And so it just really piqued kind of my interest into, oh, there's a different way to approach things. And so eventually I got a job as a medical assistant. And so I really got to see, firsthand that, the work that different medical and nursing professions do, and it really kind of pushed me into pursuing a career. So I got my bachelor's. I double majored in sociology and Spanish with a history minor, and so I do feel like that background really does bring a different kind of perspective into my nursing career. And then as I was a medical assistant, I realized that I did want to go into nursing and then to become a nurse practitioner. And so I had to go and do the post-bac program to get all of those fun science classes out of the way. And I survived, didn't get the best grades, but I passed and was able to um, get my master's in nursing. And I did the master's entry program at that time. And it was a 1-year accelerated RN because I had already had a bachelor's with all those prerequisites. So it was very intensive nursing for 1 year and clinicals. And I had my RN at the end and took my licensing boards. And then the remainder of the years were spent doing the master's level work. And it was a really great program. It was new at UVM at that time. I think we were the second class to go through it. So there was a lot of learning curve, but it was really great. And so my career, most of my time has been here in Vermont. Before I became a medical assistant, I briefly worked as an administrative assistant, which I still use those skills today. I know how to use the fax machine, and I'm decent with an Excel spreadsheet. And so I don't regret that time. And I also was we were working with kids with behavioral challenges, and they had a very intensive support program. And so that kind of started where I could see, wow, people can do hands-on care and help support kids and their families. And it was a really, really neat thing to see. But my experience as a medical assistant was just, I think, one of the best experiences I could have had. I worked in the outpatient OB/GYN clinic at the UVM Medical Center, and the medical assistants there really were trained to do a lot of hands-on things. I was taught to assist with procedures such as biopsies and amniocentesis with ultrasound. And we, really got to do a lot of direct patient care that not all medical assistants, I think, get to do. It really depends on the setting you're in. And I got to work with physician's assistants and registered nurses and nurse practitioners and residents and medical students and fellows. And it was a really great kind of comprehensive view, even from the outpatient setting, of these are all the different ways that we can take care of patients. And that kind of spurred me to pursue to get my nurse practitioner. When I finished my RN year, I got a job working with the gynecology oncology group at UVM Medical Center. And again, that I think helped. We took care of patients who had advanced cancer, GYN cancers, which back in the mid to 2000s, a lot of those diagnoses, there weren't as many treatments for. And so people did, we had tough conversations about, when treatments weren't working and when people were nearing the end of their life. And I really it tugged at my heart and mind of like, wow, there's a different, while we do a lot to people, and we have a lot of things we can do, there's also value in just sitting and being with people. Um, and then I got a job as a family nurse practitioner down in Ludlow, Vermont, which was a federally qualified health center. And we were open every day of the year, including Christmas. And we had urgent walk-in, and it was a really great first job. I got to do and learn a lot. I had a great team. Um, and then the gynecology oncologist, who I had worked with, kind of rang my phone and said, "Hey, there's this job in palliative care, and I think you'd be great. And I know their director, and I'll put in a good word for you and come interview." And so in 2012, I took a leap and entered the world of palliative care, and it was where I felt home. And so I worked there until 2018 on the inpatient palliative consult team. And then in 2018, broadened my palliative scope into the hospice world. And that's where I've been working since. And I work for UVM Home Health and Hospice. I work at our inpatient hospice facility, the McClure-Miller Respite House. And I get to do my full scope of practice where I'm taking care of patients, helping manage their symptoms, supporting families, navigating. We support patients also in the home who are on hospice. And so there's a lot of different things that we do. Maybe next slide. And so while my job is 100% clinical on paper, and doing those things that I just said, including some consults for our at-home patients for palliative care and goals of care discussions, I do get to sprinkle in a little bit of teaching. I'm back in doing some Talk Vermont facilitation, which has been really great. I'm constantly, when we have our different learning students, whether that's nursing students, medical students, residents, fellows. We have a lot of people who come through, and so I get a chance to work with them and help teach them as they're moving forward in their careers. And I really enjoy that. So always glad that even though I don't have time carved out, it kind of gets built into my day. And maybe the next slide. My day always varies. It can start at 8:30 and go till 5:30, or it can go till 6 or 7. Typically not seeing a high volume of patients, but the amount of time I spend without patients with each patient is about an hour, half an hour to an hour. And hospice works on an interdisciplinary team, which is just the best model of care. We have social workers, chaplains, volunteers, the nurses, myself, a physician, and we all work together to make sure that each patient and family are getting the support they need. And I do have some administrative meetings and things I have to do, which are my least favorite thing. And I try to just do as little of that as possible, because the direct clinical work is really my passion. And I take call 1 day a week overnight. And really, I find the work-life balance is you have to, really continue to push for that. And the things I like to do to kind of refill myself is I love to read, and it's great to be able to read for fun instead of reading textbooks. I love painting and doing fiber arts like knitting and crocheting, playing with my 7 and 9-year-olds who really keep you on your toes. Like Chelsea, I also have a house that needs a lot of renovations, so constantly doing that. And I love to bake, and weightlifting is just a great endorphin rush. So those are some of the ways to kind of balance out my stressful days sometimes.
Well, thank you to our 3 panelists, and this will bring us to our first Q&A session. So if anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat and we will start answering them. I'm just going to start us off with a question for the 3 of you. If you don't mind just explaining the difference between palliative care and hospice. I think one that potentially people might use interchangeably, but I do believe that there is a difference. If you would all like to explain that, please.
Who wants to go first?
I am always teaching new staff about this. I call palliative care like the umbrella, and hospice can kind of fit under that umbrella. Palliative care, we want to alleviate suffering. We take care of people on this full spectrum of care, and Steve, Lindsay chime in, but hospice, we're really focused on end of life, whatever days we're focused. I also like to focus is hospice is not just about death. It's focusing on someone who has a terminal illness and caring for them whatever days they have left. So it really is focusing on life and death. And then we even care for families after that loved one's death. Palliative care, someone could be facing a profound illness, maybe a terminal illness, and we're talking about what's important to them, goals, alleviating suffering, starting to take a deep dive. Even though they may be wanting to do curative treatment, engage in certain palliative treatments. But I feel like I said, palliative care is like the umbrella, and hospice kind of fits under it. And it's all a spectrum, but where hospice is a little different is the focus on end of life. So that's my spiel that I give.
The thing that I love that Chelsea mentioned is that the focus is on living. And oftentimes a lot of patients and their families think the focus is on dying. And the focus is really for both living as well as possible for as long as possible. And so that's the reason why I love palliative care and hospice, because I get to be the person who says, they're in the hospital and they're hungry and there's so much going on, but they're I really just want some ice cream. They're okay, we'll get you some ice cream. So it's sort of the little things to help someone be themselves and live well.
Yeah, I echo, what Chelsea and Steve said. And I think, we really see, I think that people do get confused between them. And so, I think reinforcing that, palliative care can occur any point in the disease, right? From day of diagnosis all the way through, and people can get their, other treatments as well. And, hospice really can shift that focus, which can be, sometimes the less you do, the more there is. And so, we see that all the time where people will kind of make the transition and they're, no longer wanting to go to the hospital, and we peel back some of the things we've been doing and they actually feel a little better. And it's a joy to see that they get, some really good time.
Thank you. I had a question on Talk Vermont and what it really looks like to be teaching people to communicate about these serious illnesses. If you could just elaborate a little more on that, it sounds really interesting.
I guess I'll start. It's really cool. So it's really getting folks to really think about how to connect with patients and sort of get to understand who they are. And so Talk Vermont is based off of some work that Vital Talk, which is a national organization that has been created to originally talk or train clinicians in goals of care conversations in cancer. And then they sort of expanded beyond cancer diagnoses. And Talk Vermont also bases a lot of its work on the work from the Serious Illness Care Program, which is out of Ariadne Labs, which is out of Harvard, which Ariadne Labs, for those that know Atul Gawande's work, was one of the mentors of Ariadne Labs. And sort of Talk Vermont combines sort of the best of those two programs, really helping our practicing clinicians follow a framework on how to share news about someone's diagnosis and what to expect in the future, to respond to emotion, recognize emotion and respond to it, to elicit what's important to someone, and then figure out a treatment plan that matches those goals and values. And Talk Vermont does it in a way where it's mostly small groups. There's 6 people in a group with a facilitator or 2. And they work with simulated patients over and over again and just try these skills out and get feedback from the group. And it's just it's an intensive day, but it's just really rewarding. Yeah, I'll stop there. And Lindsay has taught in it, and Chelsea has taken many Talk Vermont courses. So I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I will just say, I think every time I facilitate, I learn something new, right? And so even though I've been doing this for a long time and I'm one of the facilitators, I'm always, hearing things a new way. And it's, I think there's so much value in practicing and being able to, in that very safe environment where you can't say the wrong thing, right? I think sometimes we worry about, oh, am I going to say the wrong thing? And is someone going to be upset? And it lets you kind of do that practice and get that support and feedback, which is just huge for our own growth.
I've taken the course, a lot of different variations of it. And I think what I love as a learner and an educator is the safety, the space. But what you realize too, when you're getting in, like when I got into medicine, like nobody was telling me in nursing school and other education platforms, like the communication skills and how vital, like how to have really hard conversations or how to respond when conversations aren't going well. And I think I loved being able to practice those skills, and it is a skill you have to practice at and you have to fail at it. And I loved that safety and I loved how Talk Vermont and things like Vital Talk and all of that serious illness, it kind of peeled things back and started teaching people fundamentals on, because we get so wrapped up, we have this clinical language we get lost in, and it's like this secret language between like doctors and nurses and all the things, and we have to think about when we're talking to real people and like helping translate it for real people. And then I loved just even dialing it down and saying, like, finding out what's important to someone, like how do you having those conversations, knowing what they know, what's important to them. And I don't know. So I'm just so glad that we have a state that really is pushing for those changes and like healthcare education to help drive that change, because we just need to be better talkers and better listeners, right?
Yeah, there's this really interesting study, and it actually looked at ICUs, the sort of patient and family satisfaction with the meeting of how it went with having a serious illness conversation with ICU providers. And they found the number one factor was more talking from the patients and the families and less talking from the clinicians. And it's just, he really hits this spot that Chelsea is mentioning, is like listening is so important. And so I think one of the values that I have gotten from teaching at Talk Vermont is just sometimes silence and listening is even more important than saying anything at all.
Thank you. Kind of related to what you're talking about now. I was just wondering, from your education or from your past experience, what skills have you learned from those that you have found to be the most useful or important in your careers now?
All right, I can go. There's obviously a lot of different things, but one of the things I think I was really appreciative of, like before I went into medicine and nursing, was that I had experience kind of doing some really I worked retail, customer service, being able to deal with someone who's upset, I think, and learning how to talk on the phone with people and all of those like basic skills that really transfer so well, and you don't realize how often those things are going to come up, I think, regardless of what you do, but especially in nursing and medicine. You always have to be kind of dealing with that perspective of how to overcome those challenges. And so that's one of the things I think I was always surprised with how much I still use a lot of those skills.
I was just thinking about like my past lives and stuff. Is when I build programs or build teaching, I kind of have to meet people where they're at. And it's not a one size fits all. Like when I take approaches to people, like we're giving, like we're taught like these clinical pathways and best practices, but like I have to really look at who I'm serving and who I'm providing care for, and it has to vary. And that flexibility of being able to pivot what I know in my head to really like match what that person needs and what's important, like their values. And I think that adaptability and flexibility in like my past careers as like a teacher and learner, like in different settings, that's really helped me in healthcare. So
it's so fascinating. The skills that we're naming are so simple, and somehow in medicine it gets shaken out of you. So the ones that I wrote down was leave your agenda leave your agenda outside the door. It certainly, when I was taught in med school, is like, come in, have a plan. And just hearing what Chelsea mentioned and Lindsay mentioned, it's so important just to follow where the patient's at and really actually listen to them and let them navigate where things are. Yeah, you can gently push. And so my second skill is ask permission. Would it be okay if we talk about this? Would it be okay if we talk about that? Which brings in my agenda, but still gives like patients and their families a choice in the conversation. The other piece that I mentioned as a physician, it's really important for me to sometimes take a step back and look at the big picture. Oftentimes I'll get stuck in the weeds and I won't see that forest. And it's so important for me to be like, okay, what's the big picture here? Does this little tweak, is that important in the big picture? And the final thing that I put, or the final two things that I said was, be curious, find out more and not make assumptions. I've certainly been dinged in the past. And then, believe it or not, like I do a lot of math, mostly around pain management and things like that. There's a lot of conversions with meds. And so my algebra teacher would be so thrilled that algebra is my friend. And I use a lot of algebra daily. And so I think my algebra skills have like blossomed in my career.
Thank you all so much. Those were really wonderful answers. I had a question about the process of medically aided death. And is this something you do often? And what does that kind of look like?
I see it a lot. Is it okay, guys, if I
Go for it.
Chelsea, I was hoping you would go first.
So different states, we're in a state that has regulation around medical aid in dying. If you're a Vermonter or you've been here for a while, you might have heard it. I'm referring to Act 39. It's a patient, and there's a lot of rules to the road, but it does give people to make a choice if they're faced with a terminal illness, based on some guidelines. That they can make a choice to pursue what we call medical aid in dying. And two physicians have to agree and consult on this patient. A physician has to be a prescriber, but a person can make a choice to elect to take medications to end their life in that way. And there's still a lot of controversy. It's still really new in the medical field. More states have more established rules, and we're still trying to find our way. But in the hospice world, we do have patients in the home environment that do elect this pathway for end of life, and we support them. We help families navigate it, the process, initiating the process. We talk through a lot about the whys and the what ifs and how it will look like. We have clinicians like nurses, social workers, chaplains, volunteers that are present when someone elects to do that and make the choice to take that medication. And there's a lot of pre-planning, planning, and then also a lot of follow-up after the event. But yeah, I've been to quite a few of them, been by people's bedsides when they make that difficult choice, and people do it for a variety of reasons. And suffering is not just what I learned too is so many myths I had in my head coming into nursing and healthcare is suffering is not just clinical, it's not physical, it's emotional and existential. And when someone is faced with a life-limiting illness, like all of those can be intertwined, and the reason people make choices There's all different reasons, and I've just felt really honored. I think at first I was scared because I came from states where there wasn't regulatory support around medical aid dying. But when I've come to Vermont the last 6 years, I've just learned a lot, and just been so grateful. And like I said, we're still trying to find our way as a state, how to support people who make this choice. It's definitely a difficult choice, but I've just been really grateful to learn a lot about it and help our agency grow and how we support people. So yeah, sorry. Yeah. So that's my experience.
And I want to just tag on to what Chelsea said. I think, the thing that anytime this comes up when a patient mentions it is really we spend time exploring the why and what they're worried about, because it is so different for everyone. And it might be something that we can address. Maybe they are worried about uncontrolled pain. Maybe they had an experience with someone else they loved who died not in a comfortable way. And so, we really, our goal is to give the maximal palliative and hospice support to these patients. So that way we're addressing the existential distress, we're addressing their physical and emotional symptoms, to ensure that there's not something that we could be doing to help. And I think, that asking those questions, the why, what else, tell me more, all of those things help unravel and unveil kind of where that person is coming from. And as a clinician, it's a physician driven, the way the law is written, it's all physician based as far as for prescribing. So as a nurse practitioner, I'm always a level removed, but I'm there as support. And so sometimes it's it might be the nurse or the nurse practitioner, the social worker is the first one who hears that the patient is interested in this, and then kind of pulling in other clinicians. And as with a lot of things, people are able to opt out. So if someone was uncomfortable or didn't feel that this was within their kind of comfort zone, I guess they can help the patient find another physician who could do that. And there's a great website. Is that Vermont Choices, Steve?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, and it has a lot of information. And so we are, it's always a balance of, making sure we're doing everything we can, and also then respecting, someone's ultimate decision within the bounds of what we're allowed to do.
The thing that I'll add, and I'll broaden this a little bit, is the thing that always has bothered me about medical aid in dying is more the logistics and how there's limited access for folks. There's one pharmacy that fills these meds. It was more cost prohibitive. Insurances don't cover. And so it's new, and so the health system hasn't yet figured out how to honor it and make it as barrier-free as possible for folks. And so I just want to mention that. And the thing I love about palliative care and hospice is there's a lot of rebels in the field. I actually went into palliative care with a little bit of rebellious spirit because it was questioning the system and trying to say, why don't we put the patients front and center and not the system? And so that's what really attracted me to it. And so I just will mention that oftentimes in palliative care, we want to try to buck the system because we want to be like, there's this human in front of us who's suffering. Can we actually figure it out? So just I'll mention that and get off my soapbox.
Thank you so much. It was really great to hear the three of you speak about, definitely a controversial and nuanced topic, but I think you all would be the best to speak about it with your background and your knowledge. I have a question, just kind of a little on the potential existential side, but I was wondering if you could speak about how your own personal opinions on end of life and dying has changed throughout your careers. Maybe if it's different from when you first went into the field, and if it's changed in any substantial way since then.
The one thing I'll say is it really just thinking about the suffering patients go through and also the randomness of disease sometimes, it has made me appreciate life far more than I ever imagined I would, and really celebrating the moments that I have with my loved ones. It also makes me not stress over the small stuff. And so I would say, in some ways, it's given me great perspective on life. And so, has it changed my view of how patients die in America? One is we could do better. But I think the piece that I would say is it's definitely changed my outlook and perspective on living.
Absolutely, Steve. I think we all kind of cherish the little things. And the thing I'd like to add would be, I think when I was early in my career in, hospice and palliative medicine, I think, you kind of have this like, well, this is what a good death, and this is what we're going to hope to achieve for this patient. And the longer I do this, the more I'm really humbled by, it's not about what I maybe would want or what I think someone else. It's you really, the best situation is the one that's honoring what is important to that patient. And I'm just reflecting, we had someone recently who really just illustrated that, that honoring who someone is, and that it's their journey, and this and it's not to not put judgment on it. And that really allows some freedom in feeling like it's not anything that I can control, right? None of us can really control what happens. I always compare it to labor and delivery, because it's similar, right? It's gonna happen when it's gonna happen, and as it's happening, we can't really stop it or control it, but we can be there to guide and help. And try to do things to alleviate distress. And it really to not feel like I'm responsible for an outcome, because I'm not. It's not, it's not about me. And that really, I think, allows you to bring that patient and the family to that forefront, that really is what's important, because this is it's their journey, and it's their, it's going to be their experience that they carry forward for the family afterwards. And we want them to feel like they did it their way, and they did it, the way that they felt respected and valued.
I've loved to learn the messiness of people. We're messy and we're complex. And I know I've said it before, we're not a one size fits all. And that's why I loved hospice and palliative care, because it's comprehensive, it's interdisciplinary, it's not nursing or doctor centric. It really takes a village, a community. One thing that drew me to hospice, just to throw it out there, is hospice is one of the few, one of our regulatory requirements for Medicare is that 5% of the care that we deliver on an annual basis has to come from volunteers in a community. So you can't get more community-based than this. But going back to what I said, it's not a one size fits all. And I think when I first came to healthcare and I was dealing with terminal illness and oncology, in my head, I was like, this is what I want to strive for this patient's death. And then over the years, I've had to pull that away. Like Lindsay said, like I always thought people shouldn't die alone and someone shouldn't be suffering. Well, we can't alleviate all, we can't get rid of all suffering, and suffering looks different. And I used to think like people shouldn't be alone, but people are complex in their relationships. And some people want to be alone, while some people want to gaggle around them, hooting and hollering. And like and it should be quiet and peaceful. Not everyone's death looks like that. Some of them do, but I just have really learned to embrace the messiness, the beautiful messiness of people. And I love that. I love that. I used to freak me out and I get so anxious, like when a death was it. And then I just kind of like, this is how it's going. And I'm just going to help them through it. And I'm not going to change people. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. That was beautifully said by all of you. We have a really great question from a student. And then after that, we'll move on to the case study. But the student asked, how do you ensure you respect a patient's preferences related to different cultures or identities when they may not be familiar with, when you may not be familiar with their culture?
I ask them. I don't know what, Stephen. I ask them.
Yeah, I think, just asking from a place of genuine, curiosity and respect. And, I will say people will let you know. And if you give them that opening, and, the one of the great things, and I saw this both in the hospital and, in hospices, we can do some really amazing things, to honor those cultural preferences around death and dying, and respecting people's, religious or cultural, rituals that they might have. And we've, I'm trying to think of some of the amazing things I can think of. Someone who, needed to be outside, right, when they were dying, and we pushed the whole bed outside. We made it happen. And, it really, I think families and patients really, really appreciate, just being curious and listening to them.
Yeah, I would say, and no assumptions. I remember getting taught in like residency, it's like, this is how this culture will approach this. And as we said, humans are so varied and messy, and just because someone is X religion doesn't mean they practice the same as everyone else. And so I appreciate the question, because I think coming from a place of curiosity, and questions that we use in Talk Vermont is like, tell me what's important to you, knowing what's going on, or, when you think about the end of your life, what would you want that to look like? And then saying, what else is important? What else is important? Really sort of digging through that with them. And then if you're like, oh, I'm not sure what that is, you can say, can you tell me about that? What does that look like? How can we help you achieve that? And so I think that curiosity and no assumptions and openness is really important.
Well, thank you. And we're going to move on to the case study portion of this session, and then we'll have a couple minutes at the end to address any more questions that students might have. But we'll let the three of you take it away from here.
So maybe I'll talk about the palliative care piece, and then maybe once they get to hospice, we'll have a hospice narration. So this is a case, a 53-year-old woman who presented to her primary care physician with a cough. And she thought it was related to COVID, and it was quite persistent, and went back and forth to their primary care physician, just wasn't sure what that was. She's a partner and 2 children, and it was, she noticed it was like impacting her ability to work and do other things. And so after 3 months, there was just no improvement. So they finally did a chest X-ray. And it found that she had a mass in the left lower lobe of her lungs. And so she went after for a workup, underwent a biopsy, some imaging. The biopsy confirmed she had non-small cell lung cancer. And then a CAT scan and a PET scan, which did a total body scan looking for whether or not it metastasized. And unfortunately, it showed that not only did she have this lung mass, but there was metastasis to her liver, to her bones, to her lymph node. And then a follow-up MRI showed that she had metastasis to the brain. So certainly a very fast-moving cancer that spread. So at the time, she saw oncology. They recommended doing, for the brain met, right frontal craniotomy and resect the tumor. She also underwent radiation therapy to the brain and also started some chemotherapy. Unfortunately, that chemotherapy, she had just had some complications from the cancer therapy and also from the cancer itself. She ended up with blood clots in her lungs and then a heart attack as well. So I think during one of the hospitalizations, I think around the heart attack, she was found to have, another CAT scan, and it showed progression of her disease. So spread a worsening of the liver, worsening of some lymph nodes. And so an oncologist switched her to a new chemotherapy, and they decided to refer her to outpatient palliative care. I just want to mention that this is very late to refer to palliative care. And what they should have done is referred her at the time of diagnosis in August, so that they would be able to help support her family throughout this. And so just think about like August to November missing that support. And so she was referred to outpatient palliative care. They actually were consulted to help her with her pain, mostly around the bones and the liver. They found she had some worsening shortness of breath, so they also helped with symptom management around that, also symptom management around the cough so that she can move around and be with her family. And then she also had some constipation. There's a conversation where they talked about her illness, the worrying concern that she likely will die in the next year from her illness. And, you know, she shared what was important to her, which was her kids, and she wanted to pursue this new chemotherapy to really be there for her kids. But she did mention that she would never want to live a life on machines, would never want to live life stuck in bed. And so it sort of drew a line in the sand, like, I want to undergo these treatments, but I would also not want to live this way. So keep that in mind as I journey through this. Unfortunately, in December, she developed numbness and tingling in both her legs and couldn't walk. And on a CAT scan and MRI, she was found to have a spinal cord compression, which is when a tumor hits the spinal cord, and often people have profound neurologic symptoms. And this is one of our palliative care emergencies we treat right away. And she actually underwent some steroids and radiation to try to see if that improved. And actually, I was consulted to help her. And we had another goals of care conversation in light of this cord compression. And it was very clear to her, or clear to us, that she said, if I can't walk, that is not a life for me. I know I'm going to die from this. And I really don't want to be sort of stuck in bed and dependent on others. And I don't really want my family to have to do that burden of care. And so after noticing with the steroids and radiation and giving her some time to see if she improved, she elected to focus on her comfort, not pursue any more chemotherapy, and decided to go home on hospice care.
So once she went home, she got services from the whole hospice interdisciplinary team, a nurse who was case managing her care, chaplain, social worker, all come out to the home to meet her, support her and her family through this. They were doing some pain management at home and helping titrate medicines to help relieve some shortness of breath as well. And the family also had some support from Child Life Services. Things were getting harder at home as her care needs were increasing, and her pain was also increasing, and taking pills and things were just becoming too challenging, and it was exceeding what they could manage safely at home. And so she was transferred to our inpatient hospice facility, the McClure-Miller Respite House in Colchester. And we were able to use IV medications through a central access port. And we were able to help address her pain and her shortness of breath, and provided ongoing interdisciplinary support at the respite house with the nurses and nurses' aides and our social worker and chaplain and our many volunteers to support her partner and children. And she ultimately died very peacefully with family by her side.
But the care doesn't end there.
There you go, Chelsea.
That, because the beauty about hospice care is grief, bereavement, like that still goes on. Like people have this hole in their lives and their hearts, and we have to help them navigate those feelings, grief support. So we will follow families and caregivers, loved ones, whoever that are affected by the loss of this person for up to 13 months or longer. And we still provide ongoing care around grief support to these people. So that's what's lovely about that comprehensive wraparound service with hospice and palliative care. So that's all I have to say.
Yeah, Chelsea, you bring up such an important point that what I also appreciate about our fields is the unit of care is not just the patient. It is the patient's loved ones. And I would also argue it is the caregivers, the practicing clinicians around them, and just thinking about how important it is for caring for everyone in that spectrum. Thank you.
Thank you. And so I had a question. I know you touched a little bit on this, but how do you take care of your mental health? And just when you have a really difficult case, when you're seeing really, really heavy things, what are your practices? We would love to hear.
I'll chime in. I think, having an amazing supportive team that you're not going through this situation alone really goes a long way. I will say, have a therapist, someone you can talk to. Like, I think therapy is the best thing because they're being paid to listen to you and support you, right? Your friends are going to have their perspective. Your families, everyone has their biases, but therapy is great. Everyone should have therapy. And really it's, finding ways to kind of let go of some of the, if it was a stressful situation or a particularly hard or very heavy situation emotionally, being able to discharge some of that energy before you leave work and then enter your home environment. So you're not bringing it forward with you. And I think for each of us, there's different ways we do that. I like to listen to music on the way home from work and sing off key because that's how I sing. It's taking time for yourself. Exercise I find is so helpful because it's giving you also those endorphins that you need to kind of help replenish, but it's also, taking care of your mind and body. And so those are a couple of the things that I find helpful.
I find debriefing quickly or soon after with the teams, certainly after a difficult conversation, going outside and being like, can we chat about that for a little bit? And so to echo, like the support of your team is so important. And then sort of like the random happy moments. I mean, my team and I sometimes will do like random dance parties or just sort of silliness. And that also can be really helpful. Gratitude practice, really important. And certainly appreciating your loved ones, your teammates. And then the other piece that I would mention, as Lindsay does, like similarly, is sort of doing some self-care. And one of the things that I have started to do, still not great, is putting my phone in phone jail when I arrive, so that I can be there for my loved ones and not be distracted by work. And it's been really helpful. And I need to remind my team not to reach out. Like, it's my phone's in phone jail, so you have to really call and not email me. But I think that's been really helpful for being present with my loved ones in my life.
I just experiencing this today. I had a really tough case I had to work with today. Giving my self permission to cry about it. I know that sounds crazy, but I used to have this really stoic way about me when I hate, like, I'm like, I've got to move past this one and take care of the next person I need to take care of. And then it builds up and you have to find ways to fill your cup. Like, you have to, or you have to learn how to, be resilient, but tough, and but also like feel. And I think when you're having a complicated case, like just being able to step away from it and like process it and cry. We used to call the hospice nurses the crying in the car club. You would leave these really intense cases and sometimes you would just have to blare the radio or just cry about it for a couple of minutes. And so I think giving yourself permission to like feel and like be okay and walk outside and take that breath of air. And I think it's okay to show our humanity, and you can show sadness in a professional way and compassionate way with families and patients and caregivers, but sometimes you do have to step aside and just kind of be in it for a little bit. Doesn't feel good, but you just have to, I don't know. So I did that tonight on the way home from work. I like rolled down the window, let the air come in my face, and I cried a little bit because it was really hard. And I'm like, oh gosh, I made it through it. And then I think about the team I'm leaving who's caring for that, but just give yourself a break. Like, let the emotions run a little bit.
Thank you
Yeah,
all.
and I think,
Share-
oh, go ahead.
No,
No,
I was
it's
just- no, continue. I was just gonna say thank you all for sharing, some of those techniques and what you do. But what were you gonna say, Lindsay?
Oh, I was just gonna say that, and now I forgot, so.
Oh no. If it comes back, let me know.
It's not that important, obviously.
We did, there is a question in the chat for the three of you. If you just could recommend some resources potentially for students who are interested in palliative and hospice medicine, if you know any books even, or entry-level experiences, or even courses that might potentially help prospective students.
I mean, there's a ton of professional organizations that have student resources. I love, if you do go in this field, think about certification and specialty. I'm always pushing that, but there's the Hospice and Palliative Nurses Association, National Hospice and Palliative Care Organizations. They have great resources, intro resources for people that are interested. So, like they're great organizations.
I was just thinking just thinking about books that come to mind, and certainly there's sort of books in the pop culture sphere. There's When Breath Becomes Air, which is written by Paul Kalanithi, who is a neurosurgeon who ended up with a serious illness diagnosis and died from his diagnosis. And I think his wife does the foreword. It is beautiful. It is a surgeon's perspective of healthcare, and then also just a journey. Sort of gets you at the feeling of being as a patient. And then also, I think Being Mortal is really interesting because it's a surgeon's perspective on palliative care and sort of getting buy-in about palliative care, which I think is really fascinating as well. There's amazing TED Talks out there as well that are short and sweet. Steve Pantalat has a really great TED Talk about palliative care. And then Lindsay, who came for Bob's convocation? I'm forgetting his name.
Oh my gosh. BJ, right?
Yes, BJ Miller.
Yes.
Also has an amazing TED Talk. And I also just named a bunch of men. So I'm going to actually also say that my amazing mentor and like the person who really inspired me to do palliative care is Diane Meyer, who is just a very passionate speaker. And she also has some work out there. And the other thing, if you want something a little more sciencey, there's a really interesting New England Journal of Medicine article that's written by Jennifer Tamel. And it was a study about randomizing palliative care to patients who were diagnosed with lung cancer, similar to the case we shared, or just usual care. And they found lots of great markers, improved quality of life when you begin palliative care consultation right away, decreased depression, less stress on loved ones. But interesting enough, the palliative care arm lived longer than the usual arm. And it was a really sort of a sentinel article to really think about. I think something that Chelsea and Lindsay both said is sometimes when you do a little bit of less and you focus on someone's quality of life and get them happy, they actually live longer than going through all the treatments. And so that article is really a really interesting article to read if you're interested in looking at some evidence-based paper.
I threw a couple of the things we've been saying in the chat so people can see. A really great book that I read is by a British palliative and hospice physician, Catherine Mannix, with the end in mind, and it's illustrating both end of life and hospice in the community, like at home and in their facility, and it's just a really lovely way to kind of normalize that dying is a natural thing that happens, right? It's we're all going to die someday, and so it's a lovely read. And then a couple other of the organizations and folks that we've talked about are in there.
Thank you all so much. I feel like we could keep asking questions all night, but we really appreciate your time, so we'll wrap it up. We would really love if the students that are here could just put in the chat and make sure it says to everyone what schools they're from. We really like to see who's attending and from what parts of the Northeast. And our final question that we love to ask all of our panelists is, what do you love most about working with the University of Vermont Medical Center or the Vermont population specifically?
I've worked at a lot of different hospices in the Midwest. And just to give you a little fun fact, so I worked in a really rural area in South Central Indiana. We served 10 counties. So I work for an agency right now that serves 2 counties, just Chittenden and Grand Isle. And the last hospice agency I worked for maybe had 40 volunteers that served those 10 counties, huge spread. In this community, we have over 400 hospice volunteers. And just for 2 counties. So for me, like, this community really does value good end of life care, and they care about their neighbors when they're facing terminal illness. And I just think that's amazing. So yeah, that's what drew me here. When I heard that, when I was doing my interview, I was like, what? Because you don't find that in a lot of little communities, and to find that in Northwestern Vermont in this little pocket, it's so phenomenal to me. So
yeah, absolutely, Chelsea, I would second that. And some of those volunteers are in their 90s and showing up every week to help patients and families. And they've been doing it for 30. It's just really remarkable, the dedication in our community to supporting people who have serious illness, and on our hospice is great.
yeah, we're one of the oldest home health organizations in the country. We were some of the pioneers in home health and hospice when it came through, and and palliative care. We're some of those frontier people trying to pioneer our way through it, and we're still trying to deliver better care, like what people deserve when they're facing profound illness. So so cool. And our volunteers are not just older folks. Like, I have a volunteer group, guys, starting next week. Over 11 of them are med students. So I mean, it varies, like, from the young to the older. So if it's something you have interest in, I encourage you, like, see how you can volunteer to help support people at this time in their lives. So that's my plug.
I think for the thing that working in New York City and coming to Vermont, although New York City was fantastic for learning and in the experience of patient care there, I would say what I really love is the collaborative spirit that exists in University of Vermont Medical Center as well as in Vermont. People are, there's an incredible warmth and community that I think people really share with each other, and everyone is there for patients. And I don't feel like the motivations are something else. And so I just really appreciate the warmth and heart of the community, the medical community here.
Well, thank you so much to our 3 wonderful panelists, Dr. Berns, Lindsay, and Chelsea. We really appreciate you dedicating your time and, speaking about this, beautiful topic. And I've definitely learned a lot, and you are also well spoken and speak so eloquently about this topic. And so it was really, really great to hear from the three of you. And thank you for everyone joining us tonight from all over. And please join us next month on February 16th for our next session, which will be announced in the next coming weeks. And I hope everyone has a great night.
Thank you. I second everything Lily said. Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful session. Have a great night, everyone.
Take care, everyone.